Seven Kingdoms was a very different kind of RTS, because although at first glance it superficially resembles something akin to Age of Empires, what with it having medieval representations of different civilizations throughout the world, it wasn't precisely that kind of game. Yeah, it had combat in it, and combat could play a big part, but it wasn't really great combat. It instead opted to offer you breadth versus depth. You had diplomacy, you had espionage, you had a functional economy, you had a production chain, and you also had a PvE element, though technically, since if you're playing against the AI everything was PvE, but you would play also against the Fryhtans, the creatures that inhabited this world. Strange entities made of stone, lizards, giant trees, or at least I think some of them were trees, it's been a while. But when you played, you kind of notice, there's something that's missing here. I mean, the combat is a bit too simple. The units, they don't really have that much in the way of them being more than one. The civilizations, well, they differed basically just because of their god and because they have different combat units with different characteristics. This game could really use something like an expansion or, oh look, there is a sequel! Released 2 years later than the original Seven Kingdoms, there came Seven Kingdoms 2, the Fryhtan Wars. Now, the reason I'm making this show is because the people that made this game, Enlight Software, asked me if I could also take a look at it when I also took a look at Capitalism Lab, and well, why not? It's not a sponsored video, by the way, they just asked us to do this, and well, why not? The Fryhtan Wars. The main characteristic of this game has got to be the Fryhtans themselves. They used to be just the neutral enemy faction, the things you would fight, the things that would sometimes attack you or your enemy or just everybody they could. Without rhyme, without reason, they would just crush and destroy everything in their wake. Well, now you can decide what that reason is, because this game let you control that faction. Well, not a faction, but many species of Fryhtans, which, yeah, technically they do compose one faction, the Fryhtans. But this wasn't just a reskin of a civilization. You didn't just have the same units, but now there were giant plant things, and you would research your ballistas, and you would have your similar methods of production, same methods of gathering resources. It wasn't the same kind of experience when you played as them, because these were monsters. They were literal monsters. They did not really care all that much for mining. I don't think they really bothered with growing crops. They kind of like killing people. They really kind of liked killing and enslaving people, and that's what you did when you played as them. You went around the map killing everybody, and if some people were still left alive, you enslaved them for the glory of your kin. And because they were your slaves, they would generate income for you on account of them not wanting to die, like everybody else did. Now, just because you were in control of what is in essence a heinous monstrosity that is both an affront to humankind and to their gods, doesn't mean that you are completely savage. You can form relations with other nations, you can form alliances, you can have a diplomatical dialogue even with humans, and they will not be consistently hostile towards you, mostly because they know that the Fryhtans, they tend to be kind of strong at the beginning, at least, because they're giant monsters, and if the enemy doesn't have ballistas or siege engines or special units, because in this game you had special units you could recruit and heroes, they could be in a bit of a trouble unless you went directly and attacked their town, because unlike the previous game, now towns can actually defend themselves. They have walls you can build and they are a bit more resilient. But that does not mean that the Fryhtans themselves are not capable of evolving, or at least of becoming more powerful. They can, depending on the faction you choose and the type of Fryhtan I mean that you choose. You will acquire different abilities, different technologies that let you be that much more monstrous. One example that I really liked is that you can kind of play Plants vs Zombies in this game, where you can construct plants, even camouflaged versions of them if you research it, that will attack anything that gets near them. Not just zombies, but people. Well, mostly people, and in general, everyone that's your enemy. They will attack him. And they will not yell, "Feed me," constantly, but they do sort of look like a certain plant from a certain musical. But the addition of the Fryhtans is just one aspect of why this game pretty much succeeded in surpassing its predecessor. When you played as a human, you were not treated to the same experience that you had in Seven Kingdoms 1 or Ancient Adversaries. You had more buildings that you could build. You had the extended functionality of your units. You had the aforementioned special units and heroes. They could even get equipment, like you could find stuff from Fryhtans, usually, that you murdered, and you could equip items to your heroes, which would make them stronger. You also had, again, the gods, if you wanted to worship someone that would come on a floating cloud and smite your enemies with holy vengeance. You had the production system where you had to gather resources, you had to manufacture them, you had to put them into a marketplace, and then with a marketplace you had to generate a caravan to go around and trade. Okay, that system wasn't necessarily more complicated than in the previous game, but the espionage did get a bit of an uptick, because now you just couldn't pump out a spy and send them and do whatever. You could actually make a spy that from the beginning would be a soldier. You didn't have to wait for them to be recruited and sent to a fort by the enemy and trained and eventually maybe become general or even king. You could decide if you wanted to have a civilian or a military spy. Or you could just build an inn and recruit a spy from there and not bother with actually training them, because in this game training spies actually takes time. Training anything is more costly in terms of time. You don't instantly spawn soldiers, you don't instantly spawn anything anymore. Things take a bit of time, and that extra time is there to make things a bit more tactical, so you don't just realize, oh, I'm being attacked, let me summon everyone and beat off the attack without any issues. No, you had to plan things in advance for good this time. And if you didn't, well, there's the retire option, or you could probably negotiate a ceasefire or call in some allies to help you win the battle. What you're seeing on the background is the HD version, which adds support for modern resolutions and also increases the maximum map size to something ludicrous. Do not play on that map size if you're starting out. It's gigantic. Or if you do play on it, don't add a lot of other kingdoms and Fryhtans, or if you do, play on a really, well, no, don't play on a low speed, because it looks just horrible when you play out at a low speed. The animations are tied to that speed. It's kind of janky. What I'm saying is, it can be a bit hard to actually keep track of everything, because now not only do you negotiate with the humans, but the Fryhtans are also a faction that you have to keep an eye on. And this isn't StarCraft. This isn't, oh, the faster it goes, the better, because you know, I have a good APM, I can keep an eye on my units, I can keep an eye on my enemy. In this one you can't. There's too many things happening all at once, there's too many alliances, too many backstabbings, too many deals, too many attacks, too many Fryhtans. It can become overwhelming at first if you play on a big map with a lot of opponents, which is also what makes it kind of fun in the long run. It increases in complexity depending on how much of it you want to play and how you want to play it. If you just focus on combat, okay, no problem, don't pay attention to, well, anything other than who you're gonna clobber on the head next time. That keeps things simple. But if you want to focus on economy, if you want to focus on research so you can have the biggest, baddest guns or the best farming, you're gonna have to be careful and pay attention to the little details, like spies, which may not be as easy to keep track of on account of there being just more stuff, more builds. Oh, by the way, you can change the size of the buildings if the normal version doesn't suit your likings. Your enjoyment of the game may vary depending on different factors like map size, number of enemies, win conditions, difficulty level, and many more. Even the faction that you choose to play as, because they are a bit more nuanced this time. The Carthaginians have elephants, for example, but what you can be sure of is that the Fryhtan Wars will give you an experience that is not necessarily the standard for an RTS, which is sadly a lesson that the sequel, Seven Kingdoms Conquest, didn't really get, and it sort of became Age of Empires with monsters. So if you want to pick up Fryhtan Wars, it's actually right now on sale on Steam because of the Steam sale up until the 5th of July for around €3.50 or something. And there is a GOG version too if you don't want the DRM, but that's currently about €8 to €9. Also, we may or may not actually have a giveaway with this later on. Still not sure about that, you'll have to wait and see. Goodbye.